currently filming in a room still filled with balloons because it was my birthday a couple days ago. So big 23. All the balloons are Leafs coloured, of course. But anyway, let's talk some hockey now. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm Victoria and I talk about all things NHL related from across the pond in Scotland. And today we are having the conversation NHL versus European hockey. And this topic sprung to my mind today because I saw just circulating in the media some videos of European hockey fans at a game, I believe it was in Finland. I'll pop that up here. And now the atmosphere of this is in pretty stark contrast to the NHL, and I thought, given I've grown up in a European hockey sphere, being in the UK of course, but someone who mainly supports the NHL, I thought, you know what, I think I'm qualified to comment on this one. So today we're having a chat about NHL hockey versus European hockey. What's better, what's my thoughts on it, because ultimately there's no right answer, but let's dive into the very big differences that exist between the two. So hockey has definitely grown to be a very international sport. It's loved across the world, but it definitely comes in different shapes and sizes, and it is not the same sport throughout the entire world, despite it being so beloved by so many. And don't get me wrong, this is a great thing because it adds so many different layers to the sport, but I always see it's always European versus North American hockey that I see the contrast between because they're so different. So let's dive in. So the first thing is we're going to talk about the ice itself, because even the ice is different. So the size of the ice itself is different whether you're in North America or in Europe. In North America it's actually smaller by about 5 yards, it's a lot narrower. Rinks over here are typically bigger and they vary as well in size over here. There isn't a standardised sizing, and even within the UK Pro League the ice is all different and it's slightly different shapes as well, but there's no standardisation like there is in the NHL, so it means that the rinks are always a bit bigger. Some of the rinks are even multi-purpose. My local rink, every time I post a picture of it, which I'll also pop up here, you can see there are curling rings on it. It's mainly used for hockey and for figure skating and also curling, but it's also a public skating rink, so it's very multi-purpose. It's big, it's a big ice space. The seats don't go all the way down to the ice. It's very, very different. Whereas I went to Scotiabank and I was like, this is insane. It's so different. It's very high up though, which I noticed, which was scary at first to me. But anyway, I digress. So why is this important? Like, who cares if the ice is at different sizes? What impact does that even have? Well, it completely alters the style of play and the way that the game is played in general. When you've got a smaller ice space, the players are closer together, it's at a faster pace, there's more physicality involved because the players are in closer proximity, whereas the more ice space you have, it's typically a slower pace, but there's more space for them to move the puck and have added skill in. So both have pros and cons, but it's an important thing to note when you're discussing European versus North American hockey. So this leads me to my next point, which is probably my main point, and it's that the style of play is so different. As I said before, the pace is very different. NHL hockey, North American hockey in general, is very fast paced. You know, you have to really keep your eye on the game to keep up with it. It's very, very exciting to watch because it's so quick. On the other hand, European hockey is much slower, but generally there's more skill and tactics involved that aren't used so much in the NHL, and the NHL relies a lot on physicality, where that is replaced mainly by skill-based activities on the ice in Europe. This is very much a personal preference. If you're someone who enjoys the slightly more skilled, less fighting side of hockey, then European hockey is definitely for you. I think you would enjoy it. On the other hand, if you're more like me and you enjoy sort of the physical contact side of the sport combined with the speed, the NHL is probably more up your street, just like it is mine. But it's definitely personal preference, and there again are pros and cons to both. Physicality historically is such an important part of the sport. There aren't very many sports where you can actually drop your gloves on the ice and punch each other without getting into too much trouble, but hockey has that, and to me that's something that's really important. I think that's an important part of the game to keep, and I'd be really sad to see that go, and it's probably why I enjoy the NHL a lot more. But I know a lot of people who say that, well, skill is more important, tactics and strategy are far more interesting to watch, despite the pace being slower, in which case, you know, European hockey is definitely the right one then. The fighting in general, I find that the NHL, the media, the fan bases, the clubs themselves, they all very much kind of push this physical contact sport that involves a lot of dropping the gloves and fighting, and I see that fans really enjoy that, I really enjoy that. Whereas if you look over to Europe, particularly mainland Europe, it's really not the loved thing across there. People would rather see skill and tactics rather than people punching each other. And I don't find that the hockey media over there uses that and pushes that in their marketing quite as much. The NHL definitely markets the sport as something that is very physical and rough, and it sort of provides this unique edge to the sport that the likes of football / soccer doesn't have. Whereas I find that in Europe that's sort of just not seen as an attractive trait in comparison, which I always think is really interesting because it's ultimately the same sport, but the styles of play are so different that they really fit into two different categories. The UK, I find, sits somewhere in the middle. I find we probably have more fighting than mainland Europe because we have a lot of imports that come in from America and Canada, which means that there is fighting goes on, but it's also not the same level of physicality as in the NHL and other North American leagues. And people here are very divided over how they feel about it. Then there's also the other end of the scale where sometimes fans over here can lose sight of the fact that you should have physicality and skill, and all they want is like an enforcer to come in, like we're in the 1980s, to beat up everybody on the ice even though they literally can't score a goal. So there is that side of the spectrum too, but the UK is a bit of an odd one and it kind of sits in the middle. So it's hard to generalise European hockey because it does differ between leagues and between countries, but it's the only way I could generalise it. I generalised North American hockey by the NHL too, even though obviously there's the AHL, the OHL, the ECHL, and then all of the leagues below that too, but I thought NHL versus European hockey in general was the best way to sort of have this conversation. And this leads me on to talking about the different cultures which exist surrounding sport between North America and Europe, because the two continents have very different mentalities and cultures when it comes to the sporting world, and it's definitely one of the biggest differences that I see between the two as someone who goes to hockey games over here and is physically in the fan bases here, but who spends most of their time watching the NHL and being certainly online in amongst a community of North American hockey fans. I find that in North America, because the culture sort of spills over from American football and from baseball and sports like that, that it differs greatly to often a very football and rugby mentality from over here. Now, take from that what you will, but as someone who much more enjoys the culture that surrounds hockey and baseball and American football, you get people in the NHL who are like super mean, but they're such big fan bases that it's understandable. But sometimes the sort of culture that surrounds football and stuff spills into the hockey world over here, and as someone who isn't part of football culture, I don't love it quite as much. However, a lot of people argue that there's no atmosphere in NHL games, whereas European hockey games, there's so much noise and the crowd, the atmosphere is great, which I do agree, it is great fun. But the NHL on the other hand has a very knowledgeable, knows what they're watching kind of approach. I loved sitting in Scotiabank, and it was kind of quiet, and at first I was kind of shocked how quiet it was because I've grown up with hockey here. But then I realised that it's just because people all know what they're watching, they're very like tuned into the game and they're just literally paying attention, and chants do still break out across the league. It's not like everyone sits there like it's a library. I really like the atmosphere, but I know that other people prefer the constant chanting and singing and stuff, which is totally fine. Again, it's personal preference, but it's a difference that I had to highlight. And then finally, you have the differences in the leagues themselves. The NHL is the biggest hockey league in the whole world. It's the most well funded, it has the nicest facilities, it has the most going on for the fans, obviously, because it makes the most money and it's in the direct market to where that sport comes from. On the other hand, Europe depends on the league again, but often covered in advertisements, rely on sponsorships heavily for money. It's often smaller fan bases as well because it's not a direct market obviously, although it's definitely growing, which is great to see. But still, a lot of people don't like the advertising that goes on compared to the NHL, so that is another stark difference. But often it just comes down to less money, less funding, and just a very different approach to the sport. So those are the main differences. Overall, my thoughts are that you can enjoy whatever you want to enjoy, and people should always just watch what they want to watch, and as long as you're not harming anyone, you should act the way you want to act too. My personal preference, I love the NHL. The NHL is my favourite thing, as everybody that probably watches these videos knows. I go to hockey across here. I have a lot of friends and a great community of people across here who I watch hockey with, but the NHL is ultimately my favourite. I like the style of play. I like the sort of mentality and the culture of it. I really find that I just get on with that really well. But that is my opinion, and everybody else can have a different opinion too. That's totally fine, and I understand why people really enjoy European hockey more, because perhaps that's just what appeals to them in the sports world more, which is completely fine, and you know, you should watch whatever you want to watch. I will always watch hockey across here at home, but the NHL is my favourite overall, basically. But again, that's my thoughts. Please let me know yours. Comment down below, what do you prefer? Do you prefer a European market, an NHL sort of approach, or do you prefer one of the other leagues that I am less familiar with across the world? I'm less familiar with like Australian hockey, the KHL, hockey across Asia. I'm less familiar with those, and I'm eager to learn. So if anybody watches those, please comment down below. Let me know, what do you think? What is your favourite thing about hockey? Is the NHL really always going to be the best? Or is Europe going to take over because there are really passionate fans over here who love the game? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, guys. That is all for today. I will be back with more hockey chats from across the pond soon. Bye, guys.